Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Housing Commission's February 5th, 2025 regular meeting, our first regular meeting. This is a hybrid meeting with the Housing Commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating in the Oath Conference Room and via Zoom. I'll call the meeting to order at 6:33. I'd like to introduce staff and commission members present. For staff, we have Housing Manager Tim Long. Good evening. Management Analyst Ariana Milton. Sustainability Manager Rachel Launter. And Associate Planner Fatim Khan. We'll do a commissioner roll call. Commissioner Beely.
Present.
Commissioner Leach.
Here.
Chair Merriman, I am here. Commissioner Ona.
She's not.
Absent. Commissioner Portillo. Absent. Commissioner Switzer, I see on Zoom. Hello.
Present.
And Vice Chair Trembon.
Here.
Tim, would you please provide instructions to the Housing Commission and members of the public on how the meeting will proceed?
Okay, thank you, Chair Merriman and members of the Housing Commission. Welcome everyone to the February 5th regular meeting of the Housing Commission, and thank you for attending. Staff will engage cameras and microphones to make presentations and respond to the members of the Housing Commission. For members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment on an item on tonight's agenda, after the chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, for virtual participants, please engage the raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen. For those who are calling in from a landline or cell phone, please press *9. For those in person, please complete a speaker card, and if you can just bring it to me. This concludes the instructions, and I return the meeting to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Next item is public comment. Under public comment, the public may address the Housing Commission on any subject not listed on the agenda. Each speaker may address the Housing Commission once under public comment for a limit of 3 minutes. You are not required to provide your name or city of residence, although it's quite helpful. And the commission cannot respond to anything that's not on the agenda. And therefore, anything that we don't see here printed, would need to be deferred at a later time, other than to provide general information. Ariana, do we have any public comment?
No, we do not have any public comment on this time.
First, we have D1 presentation on the introduction to the new city sustainability program for home electrification from Sustainability Manager Rachel Launder. However, due to Commissioner Beely needing to leave this meeting early, I'd like to reorder the agenda, bringing this item to follow regular business item 2. Is there support from the commission for this move?
Yes.
Any objections?
No.
I'd like to accommodate Commissioner Beely. Thank you. So we'll move on to me here. Under regular business, the Housing Commission receives informational presentations in addition to considering policy matters and administrative actions. First, we have item E1 to approve the Housing Commission meeting minutes for January 7th, 2025.
So moved.
This item is open for public comment.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And then I always want to steamroll over the public comment. Sorry, public.
That's the text. Do we have any public comments on the?
No, we do not have any public comment.
Okay. Looking for a motion to approve our meeting minutes from January 7th. Looks like we have one on the floor.
I move.
Thank you.
For the meeting minutes.
I second.
Great. So we have a motion by Commissioner Leach and a second by Commissioner Switzer to approve the Housing Commission meeting minutes for January 7th, 2025. I will now do a roll call vote. Commissioner Beely.
Present.
Oh, sorry, aye. Commissioner Leach.
Aye.
Chair Merriman.
Yes.
Commissioner O'Nap is absent. Commissioner Portillo is absent. Commissioner Switzer.
Yes.
and Vice Chair Trahan.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Thank you. Moving to E2, consider and make a recommendation to the planning commission to approve a below market rate housing agreement with 3705 Haven LLC from 3705 Haven Avenue. We have this to consider and make a recommendation, and I shall introduce Associate Planner Fatin Khan to give an introduction, and after that, we'd like to hear from the applicant. Thank you.
Good evening, Housing Commissioners, members of the public, and everyone in attendance at this meeting this evening. I'm Associate Planner Fatin Khan. I'll be talking about the proposal at 3705 Haven. Staff has a short presentation followed by a presentation by the applicant team. We do have the architect virtually attending, the applicant and their counsel present here in person with us today.
Can you speak up a little bit so they can hear you?
Sure, absolutely. So alongside me, I do have the city's legal counsel team. We have Mr. Eric Phillips and Ms. Caitlin Liaison with us this evening. So we'll begin with staff's presentation. Staff is presenting a BMR proposal for a 112 residential project proposal located at 3705 Haven. The project is located in the Bayfront area of the city, close to the intersection of State Highway 84 and Marsh Road. It is a corner lot that is zoned as residential mixed-use bonus. West of the property, there are two apartment complexes, Anton and Elon, and there are more commercial type uses to the north, south, and east of the subject property. Next slide, please. Currently, there is a single-story commercial building which is proposed to be demolished to make way for an 8-story, 112-unit residential building, which will be utilizing both the city's density allowances as well as state's allowances to get a higher density. Of the 112 units, 10 would be very low income BMR units and 4 moderate income units. This level of affordability allows the project to be eligible for use of state density bonus law for a total of 72.5% density increase above the city's maximum zoning density. The project will be providing 104 parking spaces, of which 56 will be considered as compliant parking spaces. The remainder will be compact sized. The project requires a minimum of 112 spaces, but as requested, a waiver to reduce the requirement by 50%. The project would feature a community room, swimming pool, a business center, and rooftop terraces as tenant amenities. Next slide, please. Since the project is proposing over 20 units per the city's BMR requirement.
Want to move?
Does not want to.
There we go. Since the project is proposing over 20 units per the city's BMR requirements, it is required to provide 15% affordable units based on the maximum density allowed per the zoning. The maximum units allowed per the zoning is 66 units, and therefore 15% of 66 units is 10 units. The applicant is proposing 7 very low and 3 moderate income units to fulfill this requirement. Next slide. Additionally, the applicant is proposing 3 very low income units and 1 moderate income unit. This allows the project to utilize state density bonus and add 46 more units to the project. 3 of those units will be provided as community amenity to fulfill the requirements of a bonus level project. The project's proposed levels of affordability under the state law allows them additional density over the maximum allowed by the city, along with 3 concessions and unlimited development waivers. Next slide, please. I've highlighted 3 concessions on this slide as are those that are being requested by the project. Concessions are defined as reduction in site development standards or modification of zoning ordinance requirement that result in actual identifiable cost reductions. I've highlighted the one that is concerning to us this evening for the BMR units. This concession is to allow to exceed the 75% rent cap for all BMR units. Next slide, please. Waivers are modifications to a development standard that would physically preclude the construction of the project with its proposed density. On this slide, I've highlighted the 7 proposed waivers, and along the 7, 3 that have been highlighted on this particular slide are of concern to the Housing Commission this evening, which is a reduction in required parking spaces, providing compact parking stalls, and providing smaller BMR units. Next. The BMR agreement captures all 14 BMR units proposed, 10 inclusionary, 3 community amenities, and 1 proposed for the purposes of state density bonus. It also addresses the concerns over prolonged vacancies for the BMR units through various marketing strategies. All projects in the RMU zoning district requires parking to be unbundled, which means that the price of the units and parking spaces can be sold or rented separately. Some locations may be better served by transit than others. For this project, it is unfortunately served by 1 bus route every 1 hour and a shuttle service as a part of which raised the prolonged vacancy requirement. And that would conclude staff's presentation this evening. However, before I close my presentation, we recommend that the Housing Commission recommend to the Planning Commission to approve the BMR agreement brought in front of you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes staff's presentation. We'll follow along with the applicant's presentation. Michelle, we don't have Ruby online with us. Did you want to make the presentation instead?
You mean?
Oh, sorry, Michelle is not showing up online. Ruby, do you want to make the presentation instead?
Let me quickly check with her. I think she has all the information that we're going to present tonight, and then now we can do it. Yeah, she said she's here.
Okay, so her actual name is not in the screen name, so.
Oh, she's raising her hand.
Yeah. He should be a panelist now. Be able to speak. I will start her presentation on.
Hello all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Hey, thank you for sharing. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Michelle Loeb. I'm a principal at LDP Architecture. Next slide, please. LDP is a woman-owned small business enterprise in San Francisco, founded in 1979, and we specialize in multifamily developments throughout the Bay Area. The development team for 3705 Haven is also based in San Francisco, and they'll be the ones that are operating this property. They currently manage a number of residential properties in 5 states, and this is our second development together. Next slide, please. To give you a brief overview of the project, similar to what Fatin mentioned, the site's located near the intersection of the 101 and 84, has a mixture of warehouse, commercial, residential uses, along with a proposed 8-story hotel just north of the site. Next slide, please. These are some photos of the existing 1-story cement plaster office building and parking lot to be demolished. As you can see, it's a very underutilized site currently. Next slide, please. So this is a 8-story, 112 unit state density bonus project. The design intent is a contemporary take on a courtyard building, and it's designed with a scale and rhythm to enhance the pedestrian and vehicle experience seeing the site. Next slide. A variety of high quality materials and windows are used throughout the site to add visual interest and emphasize different volumes within the project to help with the scale. Next slide. The building includes a variety of amenities for residents that you can see listed here, including a clubhouse, gym, business center, and residential ground floor amenity space. Next slide. Resident open space is layered between the courtyard at level 3 as well as roof decks at levels 5 and 8. Each of these spaces feature Mediterranean style native drought tolerant plants. Next slide. Public open space wraps around the base of the building with adequate lighting provided with wall mounted and bollard fixtures throughout. Some of the features include sculptural seating in the north and the west sides of the property, as well as a gathering space with a free little library at the southeast corner of Haven Avenue. And you can see some renderings and the site plan here. Next slide, please. Some offsite nearby amenities. It's walking distance from the 160-acre Bedwell Bayfront Park. And walking distance to CrossFit Gym. There's also a variety of office buildings very close by. And then we're about a mile from a coffee shop, a market, and a brewery. If driving, as I mentioned, you're right by Highway 101 and the 84. And then as Fatin mentioned, there's a couple of, there's a bus and a shuttle service that pick up right next door that run hourly, especially during commute times. Next slide. So yeah, thank you for your time and for this brief overview. Please let us know if you have any questions or comments, and our contact information for myself and Ruby, the developer, is on this slide as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you as well. This item's open for public comment. Ariana, do we have anyone on the line?
We do not have any public comments at this time.
You certainly do not have any in the room.
Oh, you know what? Someone just raised their hand online. Okay.
Hey, good evening.
Yeah, go
Can you
ahead.
hear me? All right, thank
Oh, yes,
you.
I can.
Yes. Catherine Dumont, I live in District 3. Thanks for the presentation. I looked at the some of the stuff online, and I guess I'm very concerned about of having residents pay for parking. And especially the folks who are in our BMR program. I think that would make it very unaffordable to very low income residents. I think that the units need to be affordable, even if they need a parking space. And it's not clear how much parking is going to cost and how much it could increase over time, and how much the rents will be. I might have missed that as soon as I came in late for the presentation, but and then let's see what else I had. I mean, very much in support of adding affordable homes and very low income affordable homes, but we need to make sure that they're really affordable and truly affordable. And so the waivers that the developer is asking for are troubling. So let's see. And then. I think that was mainly my concern. I mean, I used to work out on Haven Avenue, and it was kind of a wasteland, I have to say. Wasn't a lot of amenities nearby. I would never walk to the parking center that you're talking about. It's very inhospitable to ride a bike along that area and walk. I felt pretty trapped when I was working out there. I drove and I parked and I even to go to Bedwell Park, a lot of times I would drive there after work to go for a walk. And the road's narrow and it's very close to 101 and it's a lot of noise. And so anyway, you know, asking folks to live without a car out there is problematic, I think. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for your comment. I will check and see if there are any comments. Okay, there are no other public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this item is open for Housing Commission clarifying questions and discussions. Anyone might want to jump in?
I second the point on parking. I do think it's a really tricky area to assume people can live there without a car. And I think clarification on, why there's no parking offered. I feel like that's usually a pretty standard, at least for one spot experience. Would be helpful, and additionally, how much?
So in terms of the unbundled parking, that is a municipal code requirement. We are not allowing unbundled parking under the municipal code. Only nonprofit affordable housing developers can do that. So March Capital is not a nonprofit affordable housing developer.
Okay. Maybe it would be helpful to expand the question a little bit, because I think that there is maybe a lack of understanding about how a number of constraints are coming together in this perfect patchwork that makes it actually very difficult for both commissioners and applicants to figure out the best way to do this. And it not only relates to what our city codes are that are, let's say they don't necessarily contemplate how BMR units brought forth by a sponsor that's not a nonprofit. It's also related to enhancements in state streamlining codes and other things about parking. And it has an extra special little cherry on top here, because in Menlo Park, we don't allow parking on the street. So there's a lot of things that are coming together here that I think other commissioners will have. And so I know that you are a student of this, so maybe you could share kind of like how you see all that coming together.
So I'll let Ruby speak to how parking is priced. But in just in terms of legally, right, this is a pretty constrained site, as you saw, right? So how do you make a multi-family project work on the site, providing the number of units, the affordable units, the amenities, right, to make it attractive? And of course, amenities are open and available to everybody, right, equally. And then the parking, which has to be unbundled. So there's that kind of site constraints, zoning constraints, and then the state law just says, the project needs to comply with the objective standards. And then can seek waivers. And so, for example, the need for, originally when the project was proposed, it had 99 parking spaces. And the architect had a hard look about, well, maybe if we do more compact spaces, we can get more spaces in here, which is how we ended up at 104. So there was a move to provide more parking. There's also the requirements for TDM from CCAG, as well as you guys have PDM too? I never confused with CCAG.
And the city has a trip reduction requirement in the code that requires CCAG methodology to hit a certain percentage reduction. But I'm sure this is where you're going. One of those things,
One of those things is transit passes and subsidies, in addition to bike parking and other amenities, to really try to move people away out of parking. And I guess the last thing I wanna, everyone in the room, I think it is important to think about what you're looking at as an agreement for 55 years, not for the next 5 years. And so, there's transit improvements planned in the regional transportation plan. That should help in the area, in addition to the fact that, there's been a policy shift to try to get people out of their cars, right? And do things by having more bicycle lanes, sidewalks, moving to Tughello West to BMT, having policies like Melman Park that have maximum, I think you guys have maximum, not minimum parking. And I've been to many planning commission hearings where I've been asked, why can't you reduce parking more? Because parking is seen as like inviting people to drive. When from a policy perspective, the state and many localities would like to see fewer emissions and fewer people driving. So that's kind of some of the policy and legal backgrounds coming together here.
Yeah, and I definitely hear that, and that does make sense that, I'm very pro transit, but it just is, the nature of that area. Knowing that area, it just seems like it would be very tough to live without a car, so I assume most units probably would at least need one car. And how many, so there's 104 parking spots, and there's, is it 180 units?
112,
112, okay, so almost 1 month.
just not there. And I'll let Ruby talk about clearly, they're not gonna build a project where they don't think it's gonna be successful, because they plan to own it and operate it, and they have a for-profit business and the business of building vacant units. So I'll let her talk about the market research or other things you might have done.
Right, so it's common practice in Mall Park in the neighborhood area to have parking with a fee on the monthly basis. So it's not out of norm that we're trying to put in the place. We do not have a price set right now for how much we're gonna charge on parking. We're gonna follow how the market is charging, and we're not gonna try to extort because we have less parking. But we're seeing a trend, people using Ubers more, and we're also walking distance to the major employers nearby. So we're seeing opportunities, people might not need to actually have a car to live there.
Yeah, I don't know, I think, she was saying, that area, especially during rush hour, I think people are looking for parking. It'll make the congestion even worse, especially with everyone getting out of the office as well. And then I don't really see, it's kind of a hazard to either walk or bike across that bridge on Marsh Road or in that area specifically, right? So.
There is bike lane, right in front of the Haven South, and also there's a crosswalk. If you walk towards the north part, you can cross the 84 to the Gateway campus over there, and then walk further to Meta campus. So we do see maybe people would consider this an advantage just to walk to work or use their scooter. And we're seeing, as Lena mentioned, things are evolving. So we're hoping it's not like we don't want to build it, it's the envelopes limiting us for this bit more parking.
and one thing, one thing for the commission to keep in mind as you're thinking about, I know, the presentation highlighted some of the waivers and concessions that are, relevant to the way the BMR agreement has been crafted, and we're talking about the way that the project would function, and the trade-off between having units and parking spaces, and to get more units and to lose some of the parking spaces. But because of that trade-off and those site constraints, the density bonus law that the project is eligible for does entitle the project to waivers and concessions. So the standard of review to keep in mind for the modifications that have been requested would be, does the waiver result in a specific adverse impact to health and safety? Or would it violate a federal or state law or have an impact on a historic resource? And those two aren't really related. And as was described in the staff report, we hadn't identified the health and safety impacts related to any of their waiver requests that would provide a basis to deny or modify them. So as you're considering and talking about it, if there are modifications that you're thinking about, we would need to relate them back to those findings and that standard.
Can you share more about that? I mean, this has evolved quite a lot in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Where concessions were, in my experience, carefully crafted and quantified to show how they related to financially feasible. My day job is at a real estate development company, so
Yeah.
I have authored these letters up and down the peninsula, and it has changed substantially. But I think it's helpful for us to know why it's changed.
Yeah.
As I read the letter requested, I understand that it must relate back to health and safety and state laws, and yet was still grasping for some of the basic information as to why that was financially needed to make the project work.
Yeah, so, well, sorry, I should thought before I start answering your question.
It's great, but I'll stop there.
No, I understand the question, and you're exactly right. Even just a few years ago, the state density bonus law related to concessions required the developer to request concessions that were financially necessary, and some jurisdictions would require a pro forma to demonstrate, how the savings from a concession would make the project pencil. But the legislature modified those sections of the state density bonus law to make it easier for projects to qualify for a concession. There's no financial necessity test anymore. There's no ability to do a financial analysis or a pro forma. The standard is simply for a concession if it would reduce development costs. And there's been recent Court of Appeal cases since the law has changed that have interpreted that and said that for projects that provide any amount of affordable housing, any identified concession is presumed to reduce costs. And so it would be incumbent upon the city to prove that something doesn't reduce costs. And then here, the specific concession that the developer has asked for is to be allowed to charge the affordability levels that are consistent with the health and safety code limits, which is what a project that is eligible for state density bonus law must commit to providing affordable housing at rents that are no higher than what's set in the health and safety code for whether they're very low income households or moderate income households. The city of Menlo Park has an additional affordability requirement that says that BMR units ordinarily can be no more than 75% of market rate rents. But here, the moderate income rents that could be charged under the health and safety code could be higher than 75% of a market rate rent in this particular project. So the application of the city policy would depress rents below what the state density bonus law and what the health and safety code would allow them to charge. So the concession that was requested would be to allow for the project to charge above that 75% of market rent cap to comply with the state rent limits instead. And then what that does is it reduces the development cost, the subsidy that the developer has to provide to underwrite those rents and advance the development of the project. The city actually looked into that, and I think maybe had some of the same questions that you did about whether or not that actually, even under the new revised standards, reduced costs. But the HCD did an analysis of that particular concession and provided written guidance to the city opining that the concession was eligible to be considered as a cost reduction and protected under the framework of the state density bonus law. So given the changes in the statute, the case law, and HCD's direction, then really we feel like the basis to deny that type of request would really relate to, again, those specific health and safety standards, which is the other finding that the density bonus law lets you make. And again, we haven't identified a specific health and safety standard that is implicated here. So I don't know, that was
Pretty fascinating. I've
Yeah.
not seen a concession of this sort. And so in the HCD determination,
Mhm.
was it also determined that parking is not a utility?
Well, there's two things related to that. Part of the parking cost is a function of the city's own regulations, because the city code, as was mentioned in the earlier presentation, requires unbundled parking and that parking to be charged separately from rent.
Yep.
So to comply with the city's code, the developer has to charge for parking in addition to rent in this type of project.
That's not what I asked, though.
So yeah, that wasn't one part of the topic of the HCD. That was not one of the issues that HCD was asked to evaluate.
Yeah, because a developer that was using certain types of subsidy programs would essentially need to treat parking as though it was a utility and back that out of the maximum rent. So there's a few different sort of fail safes that in this town kind of get layered on to make sure that a below market rent is actually a below market rent. And there's a number of instances where the various methodologies, fail society. We fail society all the time because Bellhaven to rent there is not the same as to rent in downtown Palo Alto. And so we already have these methodologies that group and chunk by counties and the fair market areas and this and that. And how that actually works though, when you get into leasing up, means that whatever rent you're allowed to charge as a maximum, can be very, very far away from the rent that is expected, that you can expect to actually lease a unit from. So those are business considerations that I assume that any developer will be looking at carefully. You cannot use the health and safety code rents for San Mateo County and expect to see that maximum rent in Pescadero, in Daly City, in North Fair Oaks, and Bellhaven. And so this in some ways is interesting because it's a regulatory discussion more than it is an actual how one would plan to operationalize a lease discussion. But I think it would greatly take down the temperature of any other commissions that need to review this information to understand what the proposed rents will be, and if it's market data that's being used to determine things like parking. Well, okay, in today's world, what does it cost to rent a space in Bellhaven? So that could change in 2 years when the project is operational, but it would have been helpful to see that contextualized. Is that $100? Is that $200? Because removing both the 75% cap and not using parking and counting it as a utility means that these units could be in our program and could be failing to do what the program was intended for it to do. And I think that would be a disservice to our community.
I just want to say Commissioner Switzer has his hand raised, so go ahead.
All right. I just,
don't have to respond to that at all, or if that's just.
Oh, no, right? I'm sorry. She goes up and responds.
Hello?
Okay, all right.
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say a few comments here about the project. I mean, thank you for the staff presentation as well as the applicant's presentation. I think that captured some of my initial questions regarding the project, just proximity of services and some other items. So thank you for that. But I definitely understand kind of the constraints in our local municipal code, as well as say like the regulations at the state level. And while this project complies with those, I do think that if you want to say reduce it down to what would make either a good project versus a great project, I think, just some items to highlight is, say that prolonged vacancy marketing plan portion of the below market rate. It seemed like that was, a long period of time before those parking spaces would be offered to any potential residents. That potentially could be a missed opportunity on our end to reduce that timeline period. But it seemed like, that was beginning to address some of these issues with some of the parking and providing that to the applicant. So I definitely recognize the effort in including that in that agreement. And as for, say, like exceeding that 75% rental cap, it's compliant with state regulations as noted, but I think back to kind of, if we could boil it down to, what would make a project great versus good. If something was, those 4 units could be back to that 75% rental cap, that would be ideal. But as it's proposed, I definitely think, I would support staff's recommendation in the staff report. And it's exciting to see that this site would be redeveloped and that there would be some housing for our community. So.
Sure, I just wanted to touch on the kind of the prolonged vacancy. So it's not that parking wouldn't necessarily be provided as an incentive, because the goal is to never have a prolonged vacancy. It's just that the way it's drafted, it allows the developer have discretion to figure out what incentives to offer to make sure that there aren't any prolonged vacancies. So it could be free parking. It could be, transit pass for free. It could be free rent, right? Different tenants are going to respond differently to incentives, so that the goal is to be able to have that flexibility up front. And then, it's sort of the city really thinks it's the parking. So at the end of the day, developer try everything you can, but at the end of the day, if that unit's still vacant, you're offering the tenant.
So is there a spaces like? There's not a space to make that strategy work for everybody.
Right, so like the goal though is to never breach that agreement. And so at a certain level, right, rent reductions are gonna get somebody in here, not like that.
Yeah. That works eventually.
Yeah. So that, that's not in reality.
Are there neighbors or other areas that you've explored for shared parking and use in this type of arrangement in a regular downtown area, in a regular town? You would not get this type of questions from me, but my mother-in-law leaves her car in front of my house, and I get a little sticker on it the next day, right? And that's the city that we live in, and those are, and it impacts all of us. But it would certainly impact somebody who would potentially find that unit advantageous to rent, and then later found that they really needed a car. So I just do not want to see the moments in this program where people are making these choices that really seem like tough choices to make.
I'm sure many of us in this room have made those tough choices as well, which is why we understand that they can be tough. But so you did do some research on the shared parking, so can you speak to that?
All right, so we are definitely open to negotiate with the neighboring properties, including the industrial office site nearby, and also Elon Marlowe is like right next door. They have more than 1-to-1 parking, if not even 2-to-1 parking. So we also have a great relationship with them, with their property manager, Waystar. We have long-term relationship working with them. So there are definitely avenues we can reach, because we want this project to be successful. If we reach to a point saying, okay, parking is really restraining us from leasing out either PMR or market rate units, we're going to take actions. So it's not like we're going to wait for this prolonged vacancy clause to kick in to make any actions. It's definitely we'll be very proactive on that front. we did research on if there's anything available. We haven't come into a agreement per se, because we don't have project title yet, so it's too early to have an agreement in place.
Questions?
I just have one, and forgive me, I'm not a developer or have, housing as my day job, but. Are there like limitations to the size of the parking that you, in the lot that we're allowed to continue to develop, like? It's just a small space is the issue.
It's a really small site.
If I could speak to that one too a little bit. So we do have 2 floors of parking and have studied a lot of different alternate methodologies of parking, which are very expensive, and the project is not able to provide that. And as was mentioned, we've really studied everything possible as far as compact spaces, different layouts to maximize the amount of parking. So we ended up with 104 spaces for the 112 units with that methodology. There's also a lot of requirements in place by Menlo Park as far as drive aisle size and ramp sizes, garage entry sizes. So all of that comes into play, but we've essentially maxed out the square footage of the first 2 levels for parking.
There's no like potential 3rd level.
Well, then we start losing units.
Yeah.
And so it's the very classic housing
Yeah.
parking.
Consideration 1. Unfortunately.
Yeah, housing cars is good, housing people better.
Yeah, it's fair parking first. I still, I struggle with the concession around the 75% cap. I really do. I believe it's fair to say I'm a longstanding member of this commission. I'm by trade in affordable housing development for 20+ years, and there are places in our communities where the calculations and methodologies fail our community members, and this is already one of those places. So lifting that cap in an area that is already subject to seeing a cap that's too high based on its market relative to the rest, marketability relative to the rest of the county, is something that has taken me since the staff report came out. I don't have my head wrapped around that. I can understand some of the information presented tonight, and if you will excuse me, that is a short reaction time period for your commissioners, and would urge us as a project to move forward to provide more information. I understand that applicants do not submit and stop doing work between one meeting and another, so more things come around, and you'll continue to work on this as it moves through time and space. But that is those are material developments that were presented here today about the HCD determination. I'm still really questioning how the city and even HCD conceives of a utility based on the fact that if it's looking at consistency with other types of state financing programs, you do need to back out the cost of parking from the maximum amount of the rent. I understand this would be privately financed and not subject to that, but there is already sort of in the practice of the regulations, that idea that if you're charging for extra things, that they need to be backstopped by the ultimate amount. So in 2 ways, again, from removing the 75% cap, and then from having this parking be kind of floating out there, I just don't really understand if these units at the end of the day will end up being affordable. And it doesn't seem like the information's been provided for at least myself to be able to say that this BMR agreement would be in compliance. So if there's other questions, I leave that to the.
If I can, yeah. Just to respond, mentioning parking as utility. First of all, I believe this is the first project we've had with unbundled parking, so this project has certainly daylighted the need to review the city's BMR guidelines. And as part of that guideline revisions, which we'll be taking probably later this year, we'll certainly be looking into how to fold in parking as utility, understanding that there are certain state laws, other laws, you know, no parking within half a mile radius of transit stop. So how the city can respond to those type of requirements. And then potentially fold into BMR guideline revisions. So just wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, I mean. It's a very lovely project. My questions are systemic, and existential in ways. As to whether or not, you know, what is the nature of concessions if they, you know, end up with a home that is above, that's, you know, that it ends up essentially not being a market rate unit. It ends up being a market rate unit. There's a great number of homes already that are really that are marketed as BMR units that are, you know, you can go find apartments that are, you know, less expensive than the market rate rents that are out there. And so that it already is a program, I think that, because of how expensive this particular region is, that is, kind of balances on this tightrope. So that would be really helpful to understand that. Thank you, Tim.
I will say that health and safety code rents tend to be lower than the cat rents.
Yes, indeed.
To the extent that it addresses some of your concerns, maybe probably not, but.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I agree.
And then I just want to add, like, I've always, your questions the first time I thought of parking as a utility. Which is an interesting, like, existential question. But is it an amenity or a utility?
And I think in some parts of town, and this would be hard pressed to find a part of town that was where this was more of a proof point for, that this is more of a utility than an amenity. Based on lack of access, or, you know, it's a mile walk between the Willows and downtown Palo Alto is a different experience than a mile walk to the Lucci's or to get Starbucks from that. You know, there's always more to learn. I think in general, the state housing streamlining enhancements have made it easier to entitle homes, and that is a good state goal. And that there are a lot of local ordinances that have been carefully crafted for specific reasons that that state law comes in on top of. And I'll leave my professional opinion aside on that and say that it is really challenging for local bodies to then be able to say, well, these parts of the project were actually really important to us. It's very important to me when somebody in the community calls me and says, where can I find an affordable home? And they go and look at what's available, that they say, oh, hey, I'm glad that there's an option that's $200 less than what I can go and get on Craigslist. And when they're the same, like, we have basically allowed a lot of community benefits and extra development incentives for something that doesn't hit the mark. And so I'm not saying that that will be what this project has, but it's a very important concession. And I believe that if it is allowed to be concession now, that we can essentially assume that that policy is no longer a policy that works in Menlo Park, and that would even need to be whole scale reviewed. Or else, because that would likely be something that most people would ask for going forward. So it really is. It's existential for me. Anyway, I'm sorry.
I want to respond to your concern regarding the removing the 75% cap. So as you said, like, it's impossible to charge the same rent for Bellhaven versus here, or around the Caltrain station. And that's also the same reason when we're doing our underwriting. If you do add this cap to it, the BMR units for moderate income units will pay about the same rent as very low income rent. So that's why we wanted to remove this cap. Obviously, we will still be obeying the cities and the county's guideline on how we charge moderate income rent. We wanted this to be under concession because as much as we really want to make this a great project, as you may know that the ground up developments now almost like none of them could make sense to developers anymore. We still want to make this project work. And we want to do everything that to make this project pencil, and it barely does at this point. So that's the major reason we put that as a concession. And we do understand your concern. We don't want our unit to be empty, wonderful occupancy as well. That's how we can hold and operate the property.
Yeah, but for my commissioner's benefit, the 75% cap really only impacts your moderate income units. So we're talking about 3 units
Yeah.
Four, yeah.
and, oh, this is where.
Well, there's 4, but you're right, there's only 3 that are subject to the BMRs, yeah.
Okay.
Originally. Anyway.
Yeah,
Okay.
Long as you here.
And,
but yeah, so you're right, there's, I didn't mean to interrupt, it was 3.
okay, and so, I mean, just, had I had more time, I would have just looked it all up, but I was just asked. So what do we think that gets us on those 3 units in terms of the cost per month? What's the delta there between what a 75% cap would be?
I can't remember the exact number on top of my mind, but it's not a big number, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, with all due respect, for me, I was like, okay, are we talking about $200 a month on 3 units? And now we're talking about $600 a month, and we're talking about $7,000 a year. That then contributes to how much debt you can go and leverage, and I'm sorry, it seemed like a rounding error, quite frankly, and it seemed like I'm wondering why to go after this policy that's very important to the city for something that financially, had it been the financial proof burden, and had that been included in there, I still would have sort of been a little, in the previous era, I still would have been kind of alerted by that. Because that cannot possibly be what will make or break your project based on every other thing the city could request.
I
And is
understand.
there another thing you could request that would get you what you need, that would not be kind
Yeah,
of
I think
touching a societal third rail for me?
Right, on the ballpark is you're basically looking at the chart that the city and also the county guideline was the BMR units rent. You're looking at moderate income, there's a cap there, and then very low income, there's a cap there. And that's the delta we were looking at, because if we do put that cap there, the moderate income rent would get very close, if not the same to the very low income. For one, we feel it's not fair to people who's renting very low income with their income versus people with moderate income renting this, almost paying the same rent as very low income people. That's one, and then the delta is about that gap.
Okay, well, I challenge my fellow commissioners if anyone looked into.
But it's just, that's a gap today, right?
Sure. I challenge my commissioners to, put a motion on the floor after this conversation, but the floor's open.
Sounds like most people are working towards being opposed to the concession about the cap, removing the 75% cap. Is that what we're saying, or do we want to get more? You had mentioned something about getting more information, Nevada, about, what was that about the parking?
Well, I don't know, this is the
The
conversation.
delta with what would the whole package look like once you're done adding the extra? Adding in extra benefit. Subtracting how much you have to pay for parking from that, and what does the whole package look like in terms of affordable housing?
I mean, this was Tim, or the city attorney stopped me, but you know, there's very little, this project will never come back to us under SB 238.
Yeah.
We'll continue to move forward in time and space. We can add a few comments or highlights as it moves forward, for other commissions to look at, as they will. And from, like, you'll notice that although personally have lots of ideas about parking, that I've limited those, my comments really to something that I think is at the heart of what this country needs to think about, which is, do the BMR agreements produce full market rate units? I do always think that there is a marketing reality that comes in, and that the market will lower rents until somebody is in there. And like this particular policy, city policy, is precious to me. And because of that, I think Commissioner Switzer, it seems as though you maybe had you were moving in the direction of wanting to support the staff recommendation.
Well, yeah, I guess to speak a little bit on that, I mean, we're talking about 3 units out of 112 units. And we're looking at, say, like a context of this BMR agreement over what, a 55-year period. I mean, for the sake of moving housing along, I think three units being meeting, say, state standards versus the city standard of that 75% rent cap. I just don't know if that's really a hill I would want to die on. I feel like it would be perhaps not that large of an ask to have it reduced to that 75% rent cap, but there's obviously an interest in the developer to put some money into this site and provide housing to the community. So just trying to be cognizant of that and just understand, what the state legislation allows. So that's kind of where I land. I definitely, echo your interests in, having those 3 units be represented at the city standard of 75%. But I think for the sake of moving the project along, I can understand if it meets, and we've had, some correspondence, at least at the city level with HCD. I want to have any major issues.
Like to make that motion?
Well, I guess, to echo what, Commissioner Switzer said, in my time here, it's hard to move housing forward more than 1 or 2 at a time. And then sometimes we get one whole building that's affordable. So, in the interest of moving the project along, I would propose that we, accept the staff recommendation.
Tim, can you restate how you think future BMR policies might need to be looked at, given what we're seeing in state HCD, the HCD determination and other state housing laws, which are a fully dynamic environment at this point in time?
Yes, be happy to,
I kind of laughed.
in consideration of state parameters, if you will, or to still look at parking as part of rent, whether it be an amenity, utility, but to have parking as part of inclusive under the BMR rent. And so that's something that we will need to review moving forward to ensure that when a BMR rent is stated, it's inclusive of parking. So those are some things we are looking at. We will explore moving forward so you get a whole unit, if you will, parking in the unit itself. So whether that's a utility, not sure how that will be folded in or explored, but we'll be looking at ways to try to include that.
Commissioner Leach, I believe you have a motion. I'm wondering if I could make a little bit of an amendment to that.
Yes.
To be reflected in however this could move forward. And it's really because some of the material information is presented on the evening of, which doesn't allow a lot of time for reflection for myself or really anybody who might have read the packet. We did get a couple comments that they were very worried about this as it relates to the length of time that the homes might sit open. And I do think that the 75% policy and these parking dynamics really do contribute to this lack of feasibility, not financial feasibility, but marketing feasibility question, wherein the city may have to just wait a very, very long time to see changes made. And that's a concern for me. And so I'm interested in the next commission that sees this understanding that we wrestled with this concession.
Okay,
And I'm personally not in favor of this concession, even with this understanding of HCD saying this, I still, I have just kind of existential concerns about removing that and ending up with a BMR program, unit that somehow has a rent that is, not below market. And for that reason, I don't want to make this motion, so it seems that you will, but I do believe that, if we could signal to the next commission that, we have really open-ended questions about the nature of parking and whether or not it is considered a utility. And,
so what would that, I agree, what would that motion look like? What would that sound like?
motion made by Commissioner Leach to accept the staff recommendation with the understanding that staff and applicant continue to work on a plan for exploring shared parking, for understanding the nature of parking as to whether or not it is a utility or an amenity in maybe the worst part of town for transit operations. And anything else that you all may have there.
What was the last part? We got, staff and applicant will explore shared parking, define parking as utility and amendment, or amenity, excuse me?
Is it a utility or is it an amenity?
Okay,
In my world, it's a utility, and in this world, it is sort of a gray area, but it appears to be presented as though it's an amenity.
Was there something about the 75% to add in that as well? I'm just not sure if I
Can
understand it.
staff do more of an analysis to present that? I mean, our recommendation is being made with that being like a day, moment of, the HCD determination being kind of dropped out, that's on the moment, which it's always great to get the best information, and that allows very little time to, wrestle with it, and frankly, sounds very final. And, without reading it or seeing it, I feel like maybe there's a little bit more, study that could happen about that as to whether or not the conversation is closed, or there's really something more to be talked about there. Because I keep coming back to my existential thing, and it's like, if the units on our website for BMR are above market, then our program is fundamentally flawed.
Yeah, that's.
And these are some of the ways that we, in a city that has really high rents, continue to, account for ways in which the methodologies, all methodologies fail in particular instances, and that's why we have our local ordinance about this.
On that last note, you had asked Tim earlier about, potential policy changes. And if it is true that, so the state has determined that they will give bonuses for moderate income units, and they've defined a rent that they say can be charged in order to receive that bonus. And right now, the city's BMR program allows some of those moderate income units to count towards satisfying the city's inclusionary requirements. And so that's part of what creates the tension between the 75% of market and the health and safety code rents. Another potential thing to explore could be deepening the city's inclusionary policies to be all very low and low, so that they are further from the market, and that would
Eliminate the problem.
help, that would be another way to work around that, so that could be another policy
That's right.
direction that staff explores to bring that.
I want to restate my issues are existential, we're beyond like this. But it is something today.
Yeah, is that quick friendly ask is sounds like some of these things are existential, right? They're asking the planning commission to consider zoning amendments, right? Amendments to inclusionary ordinance, amendments to the parking requirements in the Bay Point area. Is that maybe a separate agenda item at some point?
Well, yeah, there definitely will be bringbacks that are unrelated to this project. Though what I'm hearing from the commission is that the motion is to recommend approval was to accept staff's recommendation for recommendation of approval of the BMR agreement to the planning commission, but to reflect the concerns that were addressed specifically, to reflect that there was discussion and concern and hesitancy around the concession, to ask that staff and the applicant continue to explore shared parking. So we'll report back on that when we go to planning commission, and then to again contemplate whether parking is a utility or an amenity in the context of this project. And then I agree separately, there was a discussion about policy changes and bringbacks that would affect, that could be, driven or inspired by some of those issues, but that would be larger policy changes that would not be related to the project.
Yeah, correct.
Are you still okay with that, Commissioner
Yeah.
Lynch?
Yes, that's great,
And
that's
just-
great, that's a lot more.
To echo kind of what Eric mentioned about greater policy changes. Typically, maybe we change our inclusionary percentages to lower income. Just to this is part of an update too, but the city is entering into a nexus study where we'll be reviewing the city's inclusionary requirements, which could include the percentage, right now it's 15%. And also the income levels in addition, how to potentially maybe even change, say it's moderate, but you don't price it at 120 AMI, you price it at 90, for example. Those are just some things that make it a little more affordable to things that can be explored that in the future as part of the BMR revisions. But understanding we have a hard cap at 7:45 with Commissioner Beely. So we still want to maintain the quorum. So please note that.
And on cognizant of that, I would second the motion on the table with the friendly amendments as discussed.
You read the friendly amendments. The whole thing.
Okay, so the motion is to accept staff's recommendation or recommend to the planning commission to accept staff's BMR recommendation. And also to communicate to the planning commission or other communication about as Eric mentioned, parking as a utility or amenity, more analysis about the 75% cap concession and how that may change the BMR or the city's BMR program, and that staff and applicant will continue to explore shared parking. Those are the three main takeaways that that staff has heard. And we'll put something together to include those 3 takeaways, but is that the gist of those 3 items? Is that the gist of the friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree so.
Thank you.
Okay.
Motion moving second.
All right, let's get it moving, guys.
Okay, so we had an initial motion by Commissioner Leach. Our Chair Merriman added a friendly amendment. So do we need a new motion to include the friendly amendment, or do you accept the friendly amendment?
I accept the friendly amendment.
Okay, so the motioner accepts the friendly amendment. So now we have, as repeated, to recommend to the planning commission to accept staff's recommendation for the BMR agreement, and then as a friendly amendment to include those 3 items: 75% cap analysis, parking as utility or amenity, and then to applicant and city continue to explore shared parking. That's a friendly amendment. That's the motion.
Yes.
And it was second,
There's
Commissioner.
second.
Oh, second by Commissioner Switzer. Thank you.
Okay, I will go ahead and then do a roll call vote. Thank you. Commissioner Beely,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach,
Um,
Chair Merriman,
No.
Commissioner O'Neill is absent, Commissioner Portillo is absent, Commissioner Switzer,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Trumpet.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Passes. I have 1 and 2 absences. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
4-1, excuse me, with 2 absences. Yeah.
Unless Switzer had to vote twice.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, I do have to sign off. So I'm intrigued about the staff's presentation about the electrifying of the home. So I'll be tuning in to watch that at a later date.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Thank you.
Commissioner.
We don't have a.
No more
Thank you all.
Yeah.
What's that?
Can we continue without?
Yeah, but
It's a
it's not an
presentation.
action item, so we
No,
just-
no action. Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Great. Yeah.
Where did the vice chair go? Did
He might just have gone for that.
Oh, but he's coming back.
Okay, all right,
Thank you. Thank you.
much.
Oh, thank you. Trying to be positive.
It's on theme. For the moment.
I can move to the other side just because we have.
Okay, yeah.
Just gonna wait for Commissioner Trumpet.
I always appreciate your expertise, Nevada.
Yes, I'm glad to.
You have a depth of knowledge, as does Commissioner Switzer seems to as well. It's helpful.
Cool. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Wander, the city sustainability manager. I started with the city about a year ago. And this is a program that I've been really excited about, and I'm very grateful for the time to be able to share with you all tonight. As housing advocates, I think you'll find this a really useful tool to help keep folks in their homes, particularly in our Bellhaven neighborhood. So we can go to the next slide. And just in case you haven't had a chance to look at the city's climate action plan or sustainability website or engage in any of our events, we have a guiding vision, a climate action plan, which sets a goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. So that means getting our emissions down to as close to zero as possible, and then using other methods to capture and store carbon. Most of the city's emissions come from burning natural gas to heat our buildings, and to heat water in our buildings, as well as our transportation. We also have our environmental justice element, which was adopted last year, which has several priorities relative to housing, which I'm sure you're all well versed in. But ones that relate to this program include providing safe, sanitary, and stable homes, and reducing pollution exposure indoors, and improving indoor air quality. So to do this, we partnered with Peninsula Clean Energy. We received a grant from Senator Becker's office through the California Energy Commission of $4.5 million for a community-wide electrification program. And we've worked with the Environmental Quality Commission to scope what that program looks like. So what we've landed on is working with Peninsula Clean Energy to offer a whole home electrification and minor home repairs to homes in Belhaven for income eligible homeowners for 80% of the AMI. We believe we have funding in this first round of the program to electrify 40 to 60 homes. And then we'll have another round of funding, 2.25 million, that we're still working and scoping on what we can do in the community. Next slide. So this program launched September of 2024. And so far we've had 33 home assessments scheduled, 19 home assessments completed, and we have 7 signed participation agreements. And the scope of work for those homes vary, but they average between $30,000 to $40,000 worth of free upgrades to the homeowner, which includes replacing their hot water heater, their HVAC system, which provides them air conditioning through a heat pump, replacing their dryer and clothes washer with a 2-in-1 unit, as well as replacing their cooktop to induction and providing them new magnetic cookware. We have not completed any installations, but they are at our permit counter under review. So the next phase of our program, as I mentioned, the Environmental Quality Commission will be looking at what to do with that second half of the grant on February 19th. So that could be a rousing meeting if you're interested in joining the conversation. I actually guarantee it will be a rousing meeting. So Jeff knows that from it really well. And then we have some upcoming outreach activities, which we hope to see you all at, or you can participate in the Belhaven Neighborhood Association meeting tomorrow evening, the Community Climate Change meeting at the substation in Belhaven next week. And we're also doing a presentation on Sustainable San Mateo County. We'll have an electrification exhibit at our annual Love Our Earth Festival at the Belhaven Community Campus on April 27th. And we're going to be mailing postcards, doing door-to-door canvassing, and really focused outreach in Belhaven. And I also brought some flyers that we developed because maybe one of our outreach strategies is you handing out flyers or sharing with your community. And so I'll offer those if you're interested. Just take a look and take any and pass them around. And if you're interested in the program yourself, I encourage you to go to the website and sign up. It's a very quick application. It's under 5 minutes, and we'll be able to call you and schedule that home assessment if you meet all of the eligibility requirements. I think that's all I have for you.
Thank you. Can you go back to those, where it shows the number of households that have, and how far they've gotten through the system and into being served by the program? And that's awesome. It seems like it's really picking up steam. Is that how you characterize it?
Actually, a lot of the initial home assessments were at the beginning of the program. There was a lot of excitement when we first announced it. And in the last month, we've had maybe 4 new applications. So it's actually kind of declined a little bit, which is why we're interested in engaging commissions and more neighborhood groups. Because I think the kind of people who are excited about it and early adopters have signed up, and now we have to get the harder to reach folks.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do you have any guesses as to why there's been a plateau of sorts?
I am not entirely sure. We have ramped up outreach. We've had PCE did like a targeted email. I think we just need to spend more time in the community. The largest tick of applications we saw came after a door knocking event that we did in partnership with Habitat for Humanity for the home repair program. And so I think just finding ways to layer our programs and do that outreach together is the most impactful. Kind of marketing electrification on its own is kind of confusing and sometimes even feels like similar scams that people in Bellhaven have seen. There's folks who go door to door like selling
Right.
solar.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happens all the time. That's a really good point.
Yeah, so it seems like it's too good to be true on its own, but when we are able to kind of bundle it with like a larger package of things homeowners need, it seems to be better received.
That's interesting. Just as we have you here, and it's so nice to hear from other parts of city staff and what's happening and trying to make connections between things like reducing carbon and getting carbon out of our building and housing, which I think many of us have highlighted the connections there. What are other parts of the climate action plan that you feel the Housing Commission might be interested in exploring and looking at, or are there other opportunities where we can try to be a conduit for people in Menlo Park to really think about this and take advantage if they're eligible for, or to know about the different ways that this is subsidized through various programs? Are there other kind of low hanging fruit items that you want to share with us and whoever else might be out there watching this commission meeting tonight?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things we've been thinking about is how to make sure our new developments, particularly multifamily, are all electric. And so exploring kind of, I don't know what authority or where you kind of join the conversation in on that. But that's something that's critical to our work, and also figuring out how to electrify existing multifamily buildings. Right now, this program is available to single family. We have a community-based organization, Menlo Spark, that successfully electrified the Willow Court complex, and figuring out how to replicate that, whether it's getting in touch with the affordable housing developers, or enacting some sort of local amendment to our building codes that requires electrification or encourages electrification. Those are some ideas for buildings. And then we also have in our climate action plan strategies around electric vehicle adoption, and it would be great to see more multifamily complexes in Menlo Park take advantage of Peninsula Clean Energy, our official electricity providers, generous EV subsidies. And I know like Anton Menlo Park, if you're familiar with that facility, I think they installed hundreds of chargers through PCE's program. So figuring out how to kind of amplify the incentives available through Peninsula Clean Energy, getting development kind of at the right time to electrify, and then helping with kind of the existing stock of aging buildings are things that float to the top of mind for me.
That's a good list. Are there other kind of more formal input opportunities that we should have on our radar so that Tim and Ariana and I can talk about whether or not there's ways to just have a little bit more communication during that? Do you know of anything coming up that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. So every 3 years, the California building standards are updated by the state, and local jurisdictions adopt them. And the building codes regulate how our new buildings are built and how we renovate and remodel and add to our buildings. And this cycle starts January 1, 2026, and council will be adopting the code on probably October 2025. And we have the opportunity to make local amendments to the state code to encourage electrification, to further encourage green building, health and safety. And so also at the February EQC meeting, we'll be talking about some of the early options we've been considering for amendments. And we could share the outcome of that meeting with Tim and Ariana and see if it's appropriate to share with the Housing Commission at a meeting or maybe through another channel. But some of the things will be like requiring wiring for a hot water heater if you're upgrading your main electrical panel, things like that. You may have seen that at the last council meeting.
Have you met with any like developers, any of the main developers in the area, like Thomas James or?
I haven't, so maybe my predecessor has, so that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, maybe Thomas James and there's, a few others, and then
Yeah.
maybe going to like different real estate offices. There's presentation there in their office meetings and getting the word out with real estate agents. It's a lot of work with developers.
Thank you.
Yeah, what strikes me is that this is a richer subsidy opportunity that also has a smaller group of people who are able to access it because we have, I'm getting it right. There's a lower amount of homeowners who are, is it 80% or below AMI than homeowners who are at 200% of AMI. And so I think the nature of the rich subsidy is what's interesting and why we need to really work hard to get it out there. So, you know, I'm grateful for the presentation because of that. And because a lot of homeowners don't meet this threshold, would challenge us as a city to figure out what we can do to actually inspire homeowners to get carbon out of their buildings. I contemplated starting this meeting with a moment of quiet for the ahistorical fire disaster that we just saw in Southern California and how that would be for us if we were to look all around us here on the peninsula and have nowhere to go. See
Horrifying.
that happening. And so adding a little bit of what, these are no longer, 1 in 100-year fires, they're happening, they're happening with way too much every couple of years. And so what can we do, even if it's great that these beach subsidies exist for this program and commend the work that you're doing, but in terms of continuing to build on what may be something the Housing Commission could care of help is, well, what can we do to inspire every homeowner to get the gas out of their buildings? And with that, I leave you with a couple ideas to potentially talk about with staff afterwards, and just, keep us in mind, let us know what you think, but one of them is really around, you mentioned it, the local building codes related to how you would remodel. They're very constrained if you're in a flood zone in the park. And coming up with potentially not subsidies, but other ways the city could really offer a carrot might be to exempt the value of remodel work if it relates to the specific carbon reduction. Because if you need to replace the exterior of your home and your roof, and you've had a third child and you need that second bathroom, it may not be a priority to get the gas off your stove. But if that wasn't counted against you in your maximum, would you be more willing to do it? And so really push the city to look at ways that it can be a partner to homeowners in these goals and with renewed urgency because of the deadly climate environment that we're in.
I was gonna say, I think another point you could bring up too, that might hit home for most of the people around here is, I think, the health benefits too, right? So, I think having gas, I don't know what the proven. I mean, having electric as opposed to gas, like having gas in your house, I'm sure creates some sort of health hazards.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times people aren't aware, like when we redid our kitchen 20 some years ago, gas stoves were like, just the thing, if you were really a cook, and maybe 25 years ago, and that's within a few years, it was like, oh no, that's a terrible thing. It's like, well, I got my stove. So, I mean, there's a, even if you feel like you're keeping up on, current environmental policy and the current thinking, a lot of stuff just goes by your, like you're saying, you've got all these other things you're trying to think of doing. So
the other area I wanted to just bring up is really, it's like the last mile problem in transportation. So when your hot water heater dies and they're like, we'll bring you a gas replacement in 12 hours, or we'll bring you the electric replacement, but you need to wait 7 days. Like, this is a very hard decision to make. So do we know about any enhancements or local improvements? Because Peninsula Clean Energy it's amazing. San Mateo County, we do not know how lucky we have it, that they've taken that on. But is there anything as a city that we can do to augment that, or other nonprofits or communications or something? Because that is a very tough decision for a homeowner to make, like my long-term goals and not having a shower, being able to cook for a week versus like something that can just show up and replace into the current system right now.
Yeah, Peninsula Clean Energy has an emergency hot water heater program where they'll lend you a gas hot water heater. And provide the installation of that while you scope getting an electric.
That's interesting. Can we get that out? Is that on the city's website?
Yeah, so they're had their soft launch, and so they haven't enabled us to do the outreach yet, but I think we're gonna be kind of teasing it next week in the digest, but I do think we could be more strategic about how we share that. Yeah. Yeah, and one of the codes we're looking at too, and we've already adopted for this cycle, at the last council meeting, we have a second reading on February 11th, is when you're replacing your electric panel, which, you know, there's only 30 projects a year like that, you have to install an outlet for an electric water heater where your gas water heater is, so it at least prepares you on the electrical side.
That's fine.
Yeah, and the other piece, I don't know if Housing Commission works so much on this, but once you start kind of looking at anti-displacement strategies and other protections for renters, if that's part of your scope. We are excited to think about what sort of programs like this one we can provide to renters. Because right now this is just available for homeowners.
So, I'm sorry, you're trying to formulate a program for renters
Yeah,
where the landlords allow, you know. Okay.
yeah, and to the point where the tenant is protected, like their rents aren't raised and they aren't evicted or otherwise displaced because now the home's been upgraded.
That's a pretty good carrot. If it's you said the average conversion job is about 30 to 40,000. The landlord can
Yeah,
say 30 to 40,000.
See what they can pass on to the tenant, yeah.
Yes, or at least freeze their rents for a couple of years at a minimum, or something along those lines.
Yeah, until the value has been, something like that.
Okay.
So those are some things we're thinking about, and we can discuss, kind of better ways to bring future program decisions and policy decisions back to this commission. And I'm super grateful for the ideas, and we'll follow up with the sustainability team on what I heard tonight around health benefits, hot water heater burnout codes, and the floodplain, and the connection to our climate emergencies.
Thank you. Yeah, it strikes me that you're trying to, the code is trying to force you to raise your house to get out of the floodplain and then not incentivizing you to get rid of the gas that would help limit the conditions under which you would be flooded. So at some point, we need to make them.
Right, so that, it's my understanding that's a FEMA requirement, but I'm not sure at what point the city. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just a quick staff update. For March, we will have the annual HCD Housing Element APR. So that reports on the city's performance for housing for the previous year. What our production numbers are and how we have done with our housing element program implementation. That is March. In addition, we're looking at scheduling the Parkline VMR agreement. I don't know if you've heard, Parkline is a larger development. And so that is tentatively on the Housing Commission agenda for your consideration next month. And once again, Affordable Housing Month is rolling around. It's in May. So again, the Housing Commission, one of the work plan goals is public outreach. I think this would be a perfect opportunity. And so if you have any ideas for outreach, such as this, coupling with the Habitat for Humanity's rehab program that the city funded for the Bellhaven neighborhood, or if there's anything. Anything else that you can think that is housing related, please let staff know. Because that's quickly around the corner.
Yes, that'll be
So-
here soon.
Excellent. Can you share after the, my favorite report of the year goes to, leaves us in March and goes to the city council, what meeting will that be at?
It'll probably, we'll go from housing commission to also the planning commission. And then, it's probably gonna be the last March meeting, the last council meeting in March. Because statutorily, HCD requires that every jurisdiction submit before April 1st.
Okay,
So,
it goes to planning and then to council.
correct.
If you could just let myself and vice chair know what those days are in case we feel moved by spirit to make a public comment when they go across those commissions.
Very good. Yeah, that's my guess, but I'll certainly confirm and let everyone know.
So it's my understanding this is the first year that we will be required to report on extremely low income units, ELI units, as opposed to just ELI units.
I think are you talking about acutely low? Or
No,
that's next year, acutely low and ELI? I'll have to get back to you on that, because I know
it passed a few years ago,
they just made some legislative changes.
and then they did another one.
Yeah, acutely low, that's for 26.
Because potentially when it comes our way, you could
Yeah.
highlight some of the dynamic housing environment that we were just speaking of and how it relates to the report.
Yeah, it's not time sensitive, but if you like, we can give you kind of like a 2025. What new housing legislation? Oh, there are like 40 bills, there are a lot of bills, but staff can also provide just a high level.
So it was a few years ago that the Robert Revis bill that requires cities to track ELI bills passed.
Okay.
And that was a few years ago, and I believe it goes into effect this year. And then the one that passed last year is pretty different because that one establishes extremely low income and acutely low income as RENA categories. So
Yes,
it's beyond the tracking, and that is extra. But this one, even the tracking of the extremely low income units, it'll be the first time the cities had, anyone at Silver had to do it, and I think it'd be great to kind of get your insights about that, what the data is showing us.
okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That call.
Do we have any commissioner reports? You're doing great this evening. Okay, then I will adjourn the meeting at 8:15. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.